Just all right. So very warm welcome to Michael J. Goldberg, and very grateful that you agreed to share the Enneagram and the Odyssey with us today. And I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself and to take us on the journey.
Thank you. Thank you. I learned the Enneagram first from the Eureka's. I thought it was a little stuffy, and but I liked Oscar. A few years later, I met Helen Palmer. She was with Riso among the first to take it public, and I spent years working with her, starting to teach, and then I wrote my own book, which is The 9 Ways of Working. Oh, I have a copy by chance. Is that showing up? Not quite. There.
No, with the virtual background is zooming in. There we go. Almost. I'll.
9 Ways of Working.
9 ways of working.
That got me started teaching around. One day I was staying with Helen in Berkeley, and I was preparing a class. And I thought of the Cyclops. The Cyclops would be a good 8. So in order to find out more, I went down to Telegraph Avenue, and how's my video? I see some weirdness.
That's perfect.
Okay, fine. The Shambhala bookstore, which was very famous, had 3 copies of the Odyssey, and I went into their back room and I started reading about the Cyclops. And I thought, oh yes, very good 8. Paging through, I saw that the Lotus Eaters were 9s that came right before, and the people of the wind, the Aeolians, were right after. And I thought, oh, 987, isn't that special? I didn't think that much about it, but over time, it didn't come instantly. And if you read the book now, it looks like it's all laid out and simple, but I had to parse it over some time until all the positions were exquisitely visible. And so I wrote this book. It wasn't that surprising. The Odyssey had always been known as a spiritual development tool, even in ancient times. And of course, the most root source of the Enneagram that I know is Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, which is also an ordered pattern of, I'm oversimplifying, but of spiritual development. And and we find also the same pattern in Dante, especially in Purgatorio. And so suddenly, instead of the Enneagram being a collection of 9 types, there was one early Enneagram teacher who didn't believe in the order, just thought the types were randomly allocated. And he wrote an article that was very controversial called "The Wings Don't Fly." He was a friend of mine, but he was wrong about that. When I went to visit with Ichazo, he told me that the wings are more important than the base point itself. And I thought, I don't understand what you're talking about. And what I saw, as he explained, and I saw over time, was that it's the relationships that the type has with its wings. The wings are where you've been, where you're going. They're really a unit. And then lo and behold, there's a lot of other movement, for example, around the outer circle that the Enneagram has. And the positions are critical. The positions are the context. So you can't think of your type in isolation, which many people would have. I had one student who said, I want to write a book about the Enneagram, but only about fours. And, there's a lot you can say about fours, but everything you would say, they're creative, they're depressive, they're beautiful, whatever you might say, is all in comparison to something else. So even when you talk about one type, it's in the context of all 8. And that's a large part of the work, is finding the context, finding the relationships. The lines are a key to that. And they also, like the outer circle, are in motion, in dynamics. And the lines represent polarities. And I saw, skimming the materials, I haven't seen your show yet, Renata, but I understand you're interested in polarities too. And so I want to dig into that, because it's not that when you're a type, when you're fixated, it means you're stuck at the end of the line. You're stuck at the end of 4 lines, say. But the work of the Enneagram is to loosen that up and have a good relationship with the other end of the line. That's central. And so today, what I'd like to do with the Odyssey is go through the outer circle in reverse order with the types that show up in the Odyssey. The Iliad, the story before our story, which is the Trojan War, the types appear in numerical order. And the Iliad is about going out into the world and making yourself known and fighting with others who want what you want and trying to get it too. And the Odyssey is about returning home to your true self. Having learned your lessons, how do you need to unravel? So the themes of today are that the Enneagram moves in dynamics. There are many pathways, but perhaps the main one is the outer circle, which we'll talk today. And also the Odyssey has beautiful, I would say beautiful descriptions that can add to your understanding of and teaching of type in a way that you might not have thought of. Some of that is in the Travels with Odysseus book, and even more of it is in the Odyssey itself. Renata, how am I doing? Say something.
You're doing great, Michael.
Okay.
Thank
Just
you.
checking. Yeah. Any questions or comments from anybody? Can we get those? Questions
or comments? I think if you do have along the way, just raise your hand or type your question in the chat and I'll flag that for you.
Perfect.
Or if you want it at various intervals, if you want to pause the questions, feel free.
Let's try, I may do that, but let's try also letting people ask questions as they have them.
Okay.
It may help reorient me if there are any.
Great.
Okay. So I think I'll jump in.
Let's go.
I'd just like to say, Michael, I believe, discovered something very important for our understanding not of the Enneagram, but human nature. If you ever saw the Imitation Game where they solve cryptology, that's work that I did as a very young man, although I never met Benedict Cumberbatch or Keira Knightley. But you have a key that unlocks certain information. I believe Michael struck upon that because of his giftedness and his genius. And I think what he's getting at is one way is for unraveling, one way around the circle, and the other way is to restore to health. And that's what the Odyssey does. That the Odyssey is so filled with riches on how we can become a holistic people and how to care for each other. In every chapter of the Odyssey, it mentions hospitality, that generosity of spirit towards each other. And Michael, I can say as a friend, is one of the most hospitable people I've ever met. I think that's what helped him spot this, because he had a genuine spirit that was open to this possibility. Sorry for the commercial, Michael, but I had to get that in.
Thanks, Bob.
You have to earn your pay there, Bob, so fine. Yeah, now, there's in a large sense, there's two ways of approaching the Enneagram, which is the way I started and the way many people do it, which is by excavating the type, digging deeper, finding arcane dynamics in it. Oscar said that was a little dangerous because you tend to establish a fort at your point. You might be saying, I'm an 8, deal with it. And the other way is to find the context of the 8, which is always the other 8, and to see how they relate. There are solid lines that are that have particular issues, dynamics. There are dotted lines from each type as well, which you don't see as much. And there are the wings. And so each type is connected in many ways to the rest of them. And that's part of the dynamics approach. The Iliad, the story before our story, is the story of the last year of the Trojan War. 10 years, Troy, which is in Asia Minor, and in this, the Greeks win the final victory. The victory was the cleverest of the Greek generals, whose name was Odysseus, thought of the idea of building a giant wooden horse and leaving it outside the doors doesn't sound right, the gates of Troy, and seeing if they would take it in. Now, in this horse, it was hollow and it was filled with Greek soldiers, and sure enough, the Trojans took it in after much debate, and then at night, the Greek soldiers snuck out and destroyed Troy. And won their battle. And so now it's time for everybody to go home. For Ithaca, for Odysseus, it's the little rocky island of Ithaca. Although recent scholarship shows he probably was home on the island next door, if at all. But he was in the story, he goes home to Ithaca. It's about a 2-week sail, and it takes him 10 years. And this journey of his is called the Odyssey, the journey of Odysseus. So he goes out with his flotilla on his way home, and his first stop is the land of the lotus eaters. So see if you can imagine for yourself a lovely beach, maybe right there in Cape Town. Except there are sharks, watch out. And three of Odysseus' men run right to the beach, and they meet the local inhabitants. The local inhabitants are called lotus eaters because they have this it's not the lotus that we know from India. This lotus is a narcotic, and it has a very specific result. And the result is you forget all memories of home. Home is where the heart is, of course. And home is where you're most yourself. You're seen for who you are. Even if there are conflicts, you're known. And then also you're at home and grounded, you can see clearly. And mostly, whether we know it or not, home is in the background as a point of guidance, whether we like it and want to go away or not. But now suddenly, Odysseus' sailors have lost all memory of home. It means they don't have a place to set their compass by. It means that they are just floating along. They can't choose one thing over another. Oh, they might be able to choose an ice cream flavor, Cherry Garcia over vanilla, but they can't make the big decisions because they don't have the orientation. You know, ultimately home is your deep self, and this is what they've lost. So they're just happy to lay there on the beach in Lotus Land, and there's no reason to go anywhere. Odysseus sees what's happening, and he flies off the ship with a couple of men, and he drags the men who've eaten lotus back to the ship, and he ties them to the rowing benches, and they set sail. And each of the stops has this kind of lesson, and here it is that with a 9, you can't shake them and argue them back into sensibility. You can't make them do something, and maybe you can make them do something physically, but you can't change their brain through argument. They'll always see the other side, and so on. And so Odysseus doesn't bother with any of that. For some of the other types, yes, you can argue with them. But here, he just takes them and puts them in the rowboats. And there's something to be said for, what 9 needs to be doing is doing some action, being in the rowboat and rowing, even though they don't have a clear sense of where they're going yet, even though they don't have a map. The idea for 9 is movement, directed movement, and not swimming around in the possibilities of their head on the beach in Lotus Land. So we
That's
meet
kind of like the 8 kicking in.
Go on.
That's like the 8 kicking in.
How so?
The 9 isn't moving, and suddenly that 8 wing helps them move, take direction. Yeah,
that's excellent. You know, I've never thought of this, but it's an 8-ish kind of solution for 9, which is that it's a just do it power solution. There's not a lot of philosophizing going on as Odysseus ties the men to the rowing bench. It's a power play, and that's true for all the types. Their solution comes outside themselves. Some people say, well, you just have to evolve within your type, which is a much bigger discussion than we have today. But I don't think that's how the Enneagram is set up. I think you need to draw on the others to find your place. So we find the 9 in big organizations, the post office, just a second. Okay.
Melody, do you have a question?
Say again, please.
I think somebody had a question. I'm just checking in. Melody? Did you have a question?
Melody. She can't get it out. She's mute?
Are you there?
No, she doesn't have a question.
I can't you hear me? Can you
Can
hear me now?
Can hear you now.
The point you made about the solution coming from outside of oneself, is it that meaning of one's life comes from outside of oneself as well, do you think?
If you're leaning, you're pushing the idea that you're not in the right position, and you have to sort of widen or expand your space. I like leaning as an example. It means you have to change your posture. Does that make sense?
Yes, makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes, that makes sense.
In general terms, go ahead.
No, that makes sense. You know, I mean, somebody like Viktor Frankl, for example, spoke about the call to meaning coming from outside of oneself.
Yes.
And I've often wondered about the Enneagram because we tend to, especially as 4s, wallow in the interior mud, and that's not actually where we should be looking.
Yeah, I think that's right. Remember, when people first discover the Enneagram and they find out their type and they sort of become on that team. I'm a 6, I'm a 7, and this is who I am. You see the world in terms of that. You hang out with the other 7s, and the deeper study is not identifying with your type. Your type is the place you're fixated. Your type is the place you overdo your lens to the world. And in general, the more you can do to see the world through the lenses of other perspectives, the less fixated you are.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you. So many connections that come. Anyway, I've only talked about the Odyssey, I think one time, presented the Odyssey one time during COVID. And I was talking this morning and saying how much I had given up all of my workouts, and there's no reason for it really. So I'm just coming out of it now. I'm very happy to talk about this to you. I'm remembering a lot of things. So the cruise sails on, and the next island they come to is the island of the Cyclops. Cyclops are giants with one big eye in the center of their forehead. And they don't do any farming. Everything just grows there. Trees of fruits and wild grains. And that's how the Cyclops earn their living, is they farm the wild stuff. But it's very lush. And each Cyclops lives on his own mountain with his family. And and they protect their families. So Odysseus and his men come to the cave of a particular Cyclops. His name is Polyphemus. All the Cyclops are children of Poseidon, the god of the sea. And so there's nobody there at Polyphemus's house. And so Odysseus' men make themselves at home, and they build a fire, and eventually Polyphemus comes home, and he's not friendly to visitors. And he says to the visitor, Odysseus says, listen, Zeus protects travelers, and we're travelers, and so you have to protect us. And Polyphemus says, ha! He says, we're not afraid of the gods. We're actually stronger than the gods. I don't know if any of you recognize an Enneagram type that might think they were stronger than the gods, but here's one. And so he takes two of Odysseus' men, knocks their heads against the wall, and eats them for dinner. Remember, this is a children's story. And then Odysseus goes to sleep. I'm sorry, Polyphemus goes to sleep. And Odysseus and his men sharpen a stick with a point. When Polyphemus is laying there splayed out drunk, they all rush up and poke out his eye, which is something my mother used to worry about. She'd say, watch out, you're going to poke out your eye with a stick. And at any rate, Polyphemus is now blind, and it comes morning, and the flock has to get out, and Odysseus's men hide under the sheep. They hang themselves under the sheep. And Polyphemus is not psychological. He doesn't look under the surface for things. And so Odysseus and men sneak out in the underbelly. And then they run down to their ship, and Odysseus yells, hey, Polyphemus, if anybody asks who blinded you, tell them it was Odysseus from Ithaca on 4th Street, address 1329. You see, he shouldn't have done that because he gave himself away. I'm joking about the address, but once he named himself, Polyphemus could ask his father, Poseidon, for a particular revenge. And he does. He says, please kill this guy. Or, if that's not possible, please let him go through a lot of aggravations and find great trouble at home. And that does happen. Now, there's much more to say about the 8 Cyclops. Just one brief thing. When you have one eye, the world is different. You don't have as much peripheral vision, so you can get blindsided. You might not see what's coming. You're very good at going straight ahead, plowing straight ahead, but you may not be able to take in information from the side. And also, when you have 2 eyes, you have the perception of depth. You can see under things, but the Cyclops does not have that. He only has the 1 eye. And similar things. So anyway, Odysseus's men run to the ships and sail off And they next come to the most interesting place. I was stunned when I first read about this. There is an island with no fixed location called Aeolus. And it just bobbers where the winds blow. So it just floats along. And Odysseus finds the island and lands. And on this island is a constant party. They party all day long. You might think of any of the types that would like to party all day long. And the head of the island is named Aeolus, and he is master of the winds, the changeable winds. And he's very fond of Odysseus, and they stay for a month just partying because it's so much fun. And then Odysseus says, I really got to get going. And Aeolus says, fine, here's a present from me. And it's he's given him a bag of winds in a big sack, except Zephyr, the west wind. And the west wind is free to blow Odysseus and his crew home to Ithaca. And so Odysseus sets off, and in no time, they see Ithaca in the distance. They have a great vision of Ithaca. They can see the shepherds, and they can see the houses, and they're very excited. But then something imaginal happens, which in this story is Odysseus falls asleep. And the crew looks at that big bag of tied up winds and thinks, he's given him a bag of gold. Well, we should have some of that gold too. And so they open the bag of wind, and whoosh, out come all the winds of the world, and it blows them right back to Aeolus. And they miss their chance to stop at Ithaca. However, Aeolus has given them a vision of what could be, a vision of the possibility that they could be home. And that's essentially his job. His job is to imagine, imagineer, create the idea of possibility. That's what a 7 does deep in roots. So they're back in Aeolus, and Odysseus asks Aeolus, the island and the guy are in the same name. He asks him for a second wind. And Aeolus says, nah, if the gods are that nasty to you, that's bad vibes. I just don't like bad vibes. I only like good vibes. So no, you cannot have a second wind. And so Odysseus goes off dejected. And he sails off. The next island is, I should say, I'm giving you a summary here because I'm just wanting to introduce this idea of order and how it appears in the Odyssey. But it pains me to leave out details that further elaborate the types. How about, is everybody with me? Shake your heads. I can see some of you. Okay.
We're all with you.
Good.
Thoroughly enjoying it.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Is it possible that the 7 is integrating the mind, which is what the 8 needs to move forward? And the reason that they messed up with the wind is they weren't protecting it, which is what is the area of the 6. So it's almost like as they move through, there's something that they need from the next destination to pay attention to.
Yes, that's my view. It's a little more complicated than I can do right now, but I think you've got the basic idea. One of the reasons 7 is a wing of 8 is it brings them up to mental. It brings them up to ideas. And so it gives them that self-reflection. I like the idea of protection. I've never heard that, but it rings true. Here. There you are. So the next island that they float off to is the Lastrygonians, the Isle of the Lastrygonians. And Odysseus, the flotilla goes inside. It's sort of like a fjord, and all of his ships go inside and anchor deep in the harbor. But Odysseus, just on instinct, decides to anchor right at the opening of the harbor. So 3 of Odysseus's men go off exploring the island. They talk to natives. They find out that the sun never sets in this place. And of course, the reason is that the Lastrygonians like to have the lights on at all times so that they can see what's going on. And so nobody can pull anything on them. And the 3 men meet the king and queen, but the king and queen are immediately hostile and chase after them, and the Lastrygonians chase after them, and they eat one of Odysseus's men, and then they throw boulders on all of the rest of Odysseus's ships that are in the harbor, except for Odysseus' ship, which is outside the harbor. And so then they didn't even talk to Odysseus's men. They don't know that they're on a mission of goodwill, and they kill them all. And just on a reaction, these are people who believe in enemies and allies, and to kill their enemies. And you can see how, in a subtle way, police stations or the CIA or other organizations are set up on a hair trigger to check for their enemies, maybe overcheck, maybe assume someone's an enemy when they're not. But Odysseus is very far from home now, and in his image of home, people see who he is, but here people don't recognize him. In fact, the king of the Lastrygonians is called Antiphates, and that means opposed to recognition. So they don't recognize you, they just assume you're the enemy. So Odysseus scrambles back to his ship. He makes a comment. Odysseus has got a lot of 3. And he makes a comment, gee, the sun never sets here. A man could work 2 jobs, one for the day sun and one for the evening sun, and make a buck. Sly comment of Homer's. So they sail off. Let's see how I'm doing here. Okay, so they sail off from Lastrygonia, and they come to an island which is bare, except for a dark wood in the center. And Odysseus sends off his men to explore. And in the dark wood is a witch named Circe. Circe is the most famous witch in Greek myth. She appears elsewhere. And she's playing her mandolin. She liked bluegrass. And she sees the sailors arrive, and she gives them her special wine. You guys must be thirsty. So she gives them her Pramnian wine, and it's mixed with her potent evil drugs. And they drink the wine, and they all turn into pigs. So Circe's particular skill is to expose the piggish nature of these particular men. Other wild animals, lions and tigers, just kind of loll around and are comfortable with Circe. One of the men of Odysseus doesn't drink the wine and hightails it back to the ship and says, "My God, boss, she's turned all the men into pigs." And Odysseus says, "That doesn't sound kosher." And so he heads off, and on the way he meets the Greek god, the great Greek god Hermes, Mercury and Roman. And Hermes tells him he's about to beat a powerful witch, and she has this potion. And you are to protect yourself, he tells Odysseus, with this drug from me called Moly, M-O-L-Y. And Odysseus says, fine, and takes the Moly, and it gets to the little area where Circe is, and she says, oh, hello, here, have some Pramnian wine. And Odysseus quickly takes the moly, which is a small herb that's got a black flower, a white flower and a black root. And he drinks the wine and nothing happens. And Circe says, oh my, you're enchantment proof. She gets down and hugs his knees and says, you're enchantment proof. And Odysseus says, yeah. And so she invites him to stay, and they stay for a year. Odysseus has a little fling with Circe, and the men have a good time until they don't, and then they're ready to go back, and they say, let's go, let's keep moving. So Circe says, Circe gives the advice that every true helper, I'm sure many of you are, must give to each client in some way or another. And that is, Circe gives them the directions to hell. And they have to visit their own hell in order to come to terms with it. In each sense, in a sense, each of the stops that Odysseus makes have a problem, and he has to come to terms with it. And then he's free to move on. So it's a different approach than, say, building on your type to evolve it, or repressing the bad parts of your type. This approach might say to welcome your type, but come to terms with it. Not fix it, but come to terms with it.
I really love how the concept of mentoring was first mentioned in the Odyssey. It had never existed before in human literature, and that is the ability to help guide someone else. And in effect, he's able to deal with Circe because he's guided by his mentor, Athena or Hermes. And then subsequently, he's able to guide others. Well, that's not until the very end, but it's almost like to reach fullness, we have to learn how to share and guide each other.
In fact, the character in the Odyssey called Mentor, which is a character that Athena takes on when she's teaching Odysseus's son, Telemachus. She takes on the character of Mentor, who's real, but she pretends to be him. And a mentor is the first mentor. That's where the word comes from. So anyway, she says to him,
Just ask, is it coming to terms with one's type or being transmuted by it through, you know?
I didn't hear all of it.
The coming to terms suggests a choice.
Give me an example. What is the choice?
You can come to terms with aspects of yourself. I
That's
don't know,
right.
but to transmute it is to be absorbed by something painful in order to be transformed.
Yes, that's right. That's generally my view. And it's generally my view that people resist transforming that, owning that part of themselves, because they don't want to. They don't want to deal with it, own it, and so on. But here's the suggestion that you just simply acknowledge it as part of your psychic community, and allow it to fit in. Then maybe it won't nag at you so much. Circe says to Odysseus, well, look, you're going to have to go to Hades, and there you'll meet the soothsayer, Tiresias, and there are some other instructions, which I won't go into, but are also part and parcel of this. So Odysseus takes off, sails down to Hades, and part of the instructions was that he had to kill a sheep, put the blood in a trench, and then as he would give a tipple of blood to the ghosts on the other side, they would become embodied. So Odysseus does that. He meets his mother, who he didn't know she had died, and they get to hug. And then he sees some old comrades from the war. He sees Agamemnon, who did get to go home, but Agamemnon was kind of nasty to his children, Iphigenia and Antigone. And the mother, Clytemnestra, was mad at him. So she and her lover, Aegisthus, killed him, and now he's in hell. And he's so mad about it. He just can't even bear it. But he's dead, but he's still mad at Clytemnestra. Ajax was a warrior with Odysseus at Troy, and when Achilles died, they had a fight for his armor, and the fight was a foot race. And Ajax was very fast. Odysseus was fast, but he had short legs. And Athena stuck out her foot in front of Ajax and tripped him. And Odysseus won the foot race and the armor. And Ajax is so mad at the gods and at Odysseus because he should have won that armor fair and square. But he's dead, and he's in hell, and he's still mad. And
it helps to note that Greek scholars say, when we say hell, it's not a place that we think of with the religious people, heaven and hell, but it's more the place of deep regrets, unresolved issues from your life. And it's like all these people are wandering around with unresolved issues. And again, here they had fought a war, and then everything they accomplished in the war has gone to pot. It's gone. It's like war is useless. What is it good for? Is almost a lesson you hear.
that would be a good song. The third warrior was Achilles himself. And Achilles had a choice early in his life. He could be a great warrior and have a short life, or he could be a poor man and have a very long life. And Achilles chose the short, glorious life, and now he regrets it. He wishes he had been a slave to the poorest farmer instead of the short, glorious life that he did have. In any case, here are these three great warriors. They're all dead, and they all have major regrets. And there's some indication that the major regrets are keeping them where they are, and that they're, silly is the right word, but they're not. It's not completely logical that they're dead and they still have these regrets. 4.
Michael, sorry, can we just quickly backtrack? We had a question in the chat that I've only just noticed around the island with Circe we're connecting that to Enneagram 5, yeah?
Yes. So yeah, Circe is a 5. She's well within the island. First of all, she's drawn herself in. There's a small wood at the center. And there's magic going on. There's other animals turned compliant, and then her magic turning men into pigs. I guess I didn't mention that after a year she turned the pigs back into men. Like
Are there
that.
any other explicit connections to 5? I mean, I get the wood, you know,
The 5 is, yeah, there's a lot there. That's a good question. 5 is, well, first of all, the choice about turning them into pigs. 5s are emotionally pigs. They keep their emotions and themselves close to themselves. But not pigs in the physical sense, but in the sense of holding on, stinginess. And that can be in money, it can be in other emotional, other areas. So 5s are stingy. Another thing is, it take longer to spell it out, but Circe has great wisdom.
Yeah.
And in that, she's able to give Odysseus directions to the next place.
And there's that whole mentoring thing as well, which I guess is also linked to the wisdom.
Yeah, so I floated on to where Mentor is a real character who guides Odysseus, Odysseus' son Telemachus later. But Bob, what were you saying about mentoring there?
You know, I was just reminded of something when you were talking today about the forest. Is I discovered something just recently. I'm a Celtic scholar, per se, and if you look at where the Celts settled throughout history, it was always forest, deciduous forest. You can see this all the way from Turkey, Anatolia, all the way to Ireland and other places that they found. They always went to forest, and they were keepers of wisdom. And I think, in my understanding, Celtic is you acquire information to help guide others. That's the best. They have a long tradition of equanimity, women leader as well as men, but there's a generosity of spirit. And I'm convinced that the whole Odyssey was written from the Celts, which we can trace back going thousands and thousands of years, but we're just beginning to understand what they were about. But I think one of the main purposes of this story is to reveal knowledge of pathways that we encounter again and again. And Circe is helping him to go into this place of looking at our whole life, what matters and what doesn't. That's what this hell sojourn is about. Because everyone he meets has all these regrets, and he learns from them what not to do in life, how to have a better life. And by the end of the story, he does have, it says, the best life possible, but I'm getting ahead of the story. Is that what you were getting at, Michael?
Yeah, that's good. So the other thing I would mention of 5 is similar, which is that Circe has great wisdom about what to do next, or in general. But mostly it's, as I think about it, it's that spare, maybe wise, but that spare quality that is resonant with 5. You know, she's deep in her island, deep in her wood, like that. She doesn't care too much about the men turned into pigs either until Odysseus shows up. At any rate, they go to hell, and Odysseus sees that they're stuck there because they're filled with these regrets and what might have been. And that turns out to be Hades in the Greek version, regrets and what might have been.
We also have a comment about that this part of the trip coincides with the existential hole at the bottom of the Enneagram.
Ah, nice. I like that. That's true.
It's also moving from the hardest area 18 inches, moving from the head to the heart.
Very
That
good.
may be a short distance, but it is a long distance for a lot of people to bridge that, to go from fear
Yeah.
to engaging with other people.
So, very good. So, Tiresias has told Odysseus that he needs to go through a difficult strait. And also, he may pass the island of the sun and to not stop there. So, as far as the strait, on one side is the monster Scylla, who has 6 heads and 3 rows of teeth. And on the other side of this small strait is Charybdis, who lives underwater and 3 times a day swallows a gulp and causes a terrible whirlpool. And so this is the advice that Circe gives to Odysseus. She says, look, if you go too close to Charybdis, all is lost. You have to go close to Scylla, but Scylla will take 6 men from the top of their heads as her toll. And Odysseus says, I don't want to lose any men. And Circe says, you're going to lose 6 men. Get used to it. That's the nature of things. Get over yourself. And Odysseus takes this advice, sails close to Scylla. She does take her 6 men, but he doesn't stop and argue with her. He keeps moving. It's necessary losses. So when you're in a situation where you have to have necessary losses or a cost of doing business, 3s are very good at that. Other people may get entangled for other reasons. The next stop is also 3. It's the island called Thrinacia, and it's the island owned by Helios, the sun. And the sun has a flock of golden cattle. And Odysseus has been told very specifically, do not eat the golden cattle. That would be bad. And Odysseus tells his men, and he goes in to the center of the island to pray and meditate. But the men are a bit peckish. And so they do kill the best of the golden cattle and put them on the roasting spits. And on the roasting spits, the bits of meat moan in agony, which is not a good sign. And so they eat the cattle. Odysseus comes back. He says, oh no, we shouldn't have done that. And Helios and the sun and Zeus have an argument. And Helios says, I need punishment for these jerks. And Zeus says, all right. And Helios says, or else I'm going to shine where the sun don't shine. And by which he means in hell. He'll go down to Hades and shine, and that would mess up everybody's adjustment to the light. So Zeus says, don't worry, you'll have your retribution. And as the men set sail, Zeus sets up a thunderstorm, and with his trademark lightning bolt, he zaps the crew, the ship. Odysseus is left the only one alive, floating on the mast. This is very parallel to the story of the golden calf, making a false idol out of something you shouldn't. And that's something that 3s do, is they're seduced by gold and wealth and money. Not that those things are inherently bad, but they become soul focused, and that's upsetting to the sun god and Jupiter. So we have the three moving fast through the straits, taking necessary losses, and then next at Thrinacia, eating the golden cattle. And what the three does, and what Odysseus' men do, is they say, don't worry, sun god. When we get home, we'll build you a nice temple and we'll make sacrifices to you to make up for it. That's what the three does as well. I'll fix this at a later time. This is what I need for right now. But it doesn't work. You can't negotiate like that with the gods. It's not up to you. You do what they say. You don't pretend to say, I can fix it later.
Michael, we have a question, again from Anna, who's got these amazing questions. She says, did we skip 4? Is 4 the sirens?
4 is the Hades.
The Hades.
This is a land filled with regret of what might have been, and an inability to move on. It's feelingful. He meets his mother. He deals with the veterans, and it's all sad. It's all mungy, thick with regret. Anna, will that do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
There's much more to it, but I don't want to open it right now. But there's a great book to read. I don't know if you can get it in South Africa, called Travels with Odysseus by some guy, but that has even more examples.
I've pasted a picture of the cover in the chat for everybody.
I'm
Yeah.
so bad.
Amazon delivers to South Africa. We're good.
You get Amazon, right? You get Amazon?
Yeah, they've actually just established themselves here, finally.
Oh, really? Oh, it's my life and most of my friends' lives too. Yeah. When I was in South Africa about 15 years ago, teaching the Enneagram, one of the things a couple of people did was make a scrapbook of things about the types. And they had cut out from other books paragraphs, or maybe taken a drawing, and they had cut off the name of the author just for neatness sake. And I said, well, that's kind of plagiarism. And the concept was kind of foreign. Excuse me. And later, a professor at the University of Cape Town explained to me that South Africa was at that time so far away from everywhere else that plagiarism wasn't anything they thought about, that people just did what they did. And it affected other things as well. But I doubt that that's that true anymore. At any rate, why did I get started on that? At any rate, so Odysseus finishes with 4 lands, Hades and, well, I guess Hades is the main one, and then Thrinacia, 3 land, and Scylla, Charybdis, 3 land.
There was a question about the sirens before.
Really, I didn't hear it. What was the question?
Someone asked what number the sirens fall in.
Yes. The sirens are probably 4s, and I can't remember in this moment exactly where that falls. Is it right after Hades? It's just a quick little dip.
It's adjunct to 3, and I've often wondered, the people who are most successful are the ones who succumb to temptations.
That's good.
I wonder if there's a dynamic going in there, because you see someone at the highest height, look how successful they are, and it all comes tumbling down because of, well, you know what they just can't resist.
Right. So the conventional wisdom about the sirens is they're so beautiful and seductive. People passing by can't help but be seduced by that. And then they're marooned on the rocks and die. But Odysseus has a different meaning. It's the siren's song is, I feel your pain. And I'm actually shocked that there hasn't been anything written that I know about this. But the siren song is, I feel your pain and I know whether there's hope for the future. And so these are very seductive songs to share your pain and also to know if there's any hope. Circe says to fill, Odysseus can be tied to the mast and fill his ears, or rather tied to the mast. But all of the rest of the men have to fill their ears with wax. They don't have to be tied. So Odysseus tied can hear the song, and halfway through he changes his mind and he says, no, let's go over there. Let's land over there. But the men can't hear him. And so he survives. It's a brief encounter, but very important. So it's with the four. It's with the four stuff. Because of the longing, the unfulfilled longing, the general sadness, the beauty of all of that. Any more question on those guys? Half woman, half bird. Coming out of Thrinacia, Odysseus is hanging onto the mast, and he floats to an island. And I really have to apologize. I can't describe how beautiful it is. Lush. There's all this plant life and fruits, and there's a special aura about the place. And he makes it to the island, and it turns out to be the home of Calypso. And Calypso and her nymphs take care of Odysseus, nurse him back to health. Meals and foot rubs and anything you could imagine. And the nymphs take care of, except for one thing, which is that Calypso shares her divine bed with him. And so Odysseus is dying to get home to Penelope, but he stays with Calypso for 9 years. And every need is met. It's just incredible. She's the two, of course. Food, clothing, shelter. She even offers him immortality, which is a tricky situation, because if you're immortal like the gods, your life doesn't matter. But if you're a mortal, then things matter. There are consequences, and life has to be walked through. So Odysseus turns it down on that grounds. He wants to be a man where things matter. We see Odysseus, we meet him there. All the rest is flashback. We meet him there, sobbing on the beach and wanting to get home. And so he prays to Athena. And he says, look, I've done everything I'm supposed to do. I want to get home. Can you help? Athena says, sure. And she waits for Poseidon, Odysseus' enemy, to go off on a business trip to Ethiopia. And then she goes to the council on Olympus and she says, Odysseus is our guy, and we can't let him rot there at Calypso. We can't let him rot there with the minor goddess who lives way out in the sticks. And so we're going to, I want to ask you, Zeus, to free him. Zeus says, you're right, okay. And he sends Hermes to Calypso, and he says, Hermes says, you got to let him go, habeas corpus. And she says, why me? I was just trying to help. I did everything he wanted. All he had to do was do what I say. What's the problem? And Hermes says, doesn't matter. Get him, let him, set him on his journey. So Calypso, being the great helper that she is, helps him build a raft, helps him, gets food for him for the journey, nice new set of robes, and off he goes. And he floats on to the island of Scheria, which is where what's the name? I'm just having a brain freeze. Well, let's call them the Scherians for a minute. The island of Scheria. And he floats off onto the beach, and he meets Athena there, and she gives him a makeover. She makes him a little taller, a little better looking. She oils him down, and then he meets the princess of the realm, whose name is Nausicaa, and he asks for a ride to town. And she says, okay, but after we get to town, right at the edge of town, you have to jump off and go by yourself, because this is Scheria and people will talk. So this is a very prim and proper place.
Thracia,
They?
the Thracians,
Thracian, what?
Thracia, no?
It's close.
Anna says Phaeacian.
Say?
Anna says Phaeacians, Phaecian.
Okay. Phaeacian, the Phaeacians, yes. And so Odysseus hops off the wagon at the town border, and so there won't be anything untoward. Makes his way to the palace, where he says, I'd like a ride home. And they are very interesting people to ask, because they can sail anywhere in the world in one day. It's the original day cruise. And they, thank you, Renata. And they then debate whether they should take Odysseus home when he has such trouble with Poseidon and other gods. And they're cousins to Poseidon. It's all involved. So they debated, and it comes down to this. What is our duty to this traveler? The Phaeacians are interested in duty. What's the right thing to do at the right time? And they, of course, realize that they need to take him home, but they want to have a Olympics, a festival of games. And so they're outdoors, and there's all kinds of contests, and one of the Phaeacians says to Odysseus is just sitting out by the edge. He says, they invite him to play, and he says, I just want to ride home. I don't want to play around at sports. And one of the Phaeacians says, you're probably not any good at it anyway. And Odysseus says, oh yeah, that makes my blood boil. And so he shows them the master throwing of the discus. He wins a couple of foot races. There are some other contests. Of course, he shows up very well. And then it's dinner time. And there's a singer-songwriter there named Demodocus. And he asked Demodocus if there's any songs about the Trojan War. And Demodocus starts singing about the Trojan horse and how smart Odysseus was. They don't know his name yet. And Odysseus is overcome, and he sobs into his cape that he still remembered, that that exploit is still remembered. And then he tells them who he is and where he wants to go. And the next morning at dawn, the Phaeacians set off. Odysseus is asleep, and they gently take him on the ship, and they easily take him to Ithaca, and they unload gold and jewels and presents far exceeding what he lost from the spoils of Troy. And they hide them in a cave near him, and he goes to sleep. Sometime later, Athena wakes him up, tells him that there are 108 suitors who have been drinking his wine, eating his food, trying to marry Penelope, but she keeps refusing. In a famous little episode, she tells them, okay, when I finish knitting this thing I'm knitting, I'll marry one of you. And so she knits away all day, and then at night she unpeels it so that it's never finished. Odysseus goes to his house, fights the suitors, kills all of them. Much more happening there, but I'll put it aside for now. And he sees Penelope, and they don't say a word to each other. They just sit in giant chairs opposite each other. And Telemachus, who's about 21, says, Mother, why don't you talk to Father? Ask him things. And she says, we have secret signs between us so that we can know who we are to each other. That shuts the kid up. And so they don't rush into each other's arms. It's not hectic. It's very cool and calm. They look at each other. And then Penelope yells up to the nurse, Euryclea, and she says, Euryclea, put fresh sheets on the bed with the new quilts and move everything out into the hallway. And Odysseus blows up. He says, what? Because Odysseus knows, and only one servant, that the house was built, the bed was built with one post being a live olive tree, so it couldn't be moved. And then the bedroom around that and the house around that. And Odysseus is mad, who cut my olive tree? And this is what the reaction that Penelope was expecting. And she said, no one, I just wanted you to know. I wanted to know if you knew how rooted and deep our relationship is, the olive tree. And please forgive me. She goes to his knees and says, I'm sorry, my husband. It's been so hard. They go to bed eventually, and they're under the quilts, the text tells us. And Penelope tells Odysseus of the hard time she's had, of the suitors, the profligate with the wine and the food, and not taking care of anything, and everything was a mess. And alternating, Odysseus tells his story of all the adventures that you've just heard. And he says, I think very interestingly, he says, and I told her of all the people who hurt me and all the people I hurt. Somehow that leaped off the page. He was aware that he had left people hurt. And the dawn is coming. They're talking to each other. Athena calls over the dawn and says, hold up, they need more time. And the dawn waits until Athena is ready. In the morning, Odysseus tells Penelope he has one more task. He has to, told him by Tiresias, he has to go inland to a land where they don't recognize the oar that he is carrying. And the gentleman inland will say, is that a winnowing fan? Something to separate the wheat from the chaff. And Odysseus will say, no, it's an oar. It's a symbol of my journey. And I'm going to plant it right here, which is what I was instructed. And a temple to Poseidon is built around it. And then Odysseus is freed from his obligations, and he and Penelope have a long life together, a long and happy life together, and die peacefully. The last part is very interesting because I go on a while. How much Poseidon needs Odysseus on Earth as much as Odysseus needs Poseidon. It's a question of how the gods need us. The gods need us to spread the word. The gods need us to bring the news of the gods to Earth. That's the deal that Odysseus makes with Poseidon, it turns out. All of this to the last point, which is stories printed in scrolls and books until my dad sits in his big green chair, stuffed chair, with me on one arm and my little brother on the other, and he's reading us the Odyssey. And that's it, summarized. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. My only regret is
Have
there's
you noticed all the hands applauding around the gallery?
I want to encourage you to say there's lots more, and you can find it in the Odyssey by yourself. I recommend the Fagles translation, Fagles, which has such obvious Enneagram stuff in it. And there are many, many good Odysseys, but this one is very resonant with the Enneagram. And of course, the Travels with Odysseus book, which I guess I don't have right here. And
I'll put it in- I'll
oh,
put
there's
it in-
more. Pardon me? You'll
I'll
put it
paste
in.
a copy
Thank
of
you for
the
that.
cover in the chat.
Thank you for that. And just to emphasize again, there's lots more to it that's relevant, that will help in thinking about the types. I like when I'm telling someone about a type, I like imaging it in my mind and seeing what I see. It's always different, but it's nice to see the beach with the lotus eaters and so on. There's many images throughout. So it's very helpful in straight Enneagram in just defining the types. So that's the main part. Are there questions, if any?
So while we wait for other questions, given that the parallels to the Enneagram and the fact that it's in that order, seems so evident to people who know the Enneagram, do we know anything about, was that intentional, or was there some ancient wisdom connected to the Enneagram when it was written?
Yes, great question. And the answer is the latter. The Enneagram was known even in earliest times as a pathway to spiritual development. And Proclus, who lived after Homer, but still in ancient times, mentioned that specifically. So do others, that it is a spiritual story. And the other thing, sometimes people say, well, okay, so he knew the types, but that's not it. He knew the order. And the order is how everything reflects upon everything, how things get stuck, how they build. The order is supremely important, obviously.
Say more about that, Michael. Say more about, because I know Bob said at the beginning, one of the things that you really are connected to is the order in both directions and the significance of that. Are you able to say a little bit more about that?
Yes. Well, the Iliad is about going out into the world, exploring, claiming what you want against others who want it too. The Odyssey is about homecoming. And each step involves getting closer to home. Home is oneself. And when you know the order, you know a lot more. You know much about the lines, you know much about the polarities. You can extrapolate from that. The order is the most important thing. He knew at least stuff with the wings, which is extremely important. The way to examine a type is always with the wings, always including that triad to help understand that area of the Enneagram.
Can you give us an example? Like a practical example of how that's useful, how you would use that understanding?
Yes. Well, a couple of things. 2, we all know what 2 is and so on, but to know that 2 is based in rulemaking can be very helpful. Sometimes you can even go back to the rules and say, what is your guidance? and then 3, which is the practical way. And what 2s do when they're moving is they're able to combine 1 and 3 into helpfulness. Look at 3. On the one side is helping others. On the other side is helping yourself. And many 3s, when you scratch a little, one of the wings comes up very strongly. And what the task of 3 is, instead of cutting off from 2 and 4, is to integrate them to so that we often can see a 3 being philanthropic, and I suppose we can see. Okay, Teresa, and so we can see the journey to the interior, which is 4. How are they doing? The wings are a way out. Are they exceptionally tilted towards one wing? Then one possibility is to open the other wing. How do you feel about what happens when? Not that the wings have to be balanced, not that anything has to be balanced. Same with the lines, which also in their best incarnation are about flow. It's about using them appropriately, drawing on them appropriately. Because if you're a fixation, you're at the end of the line. You're at the end of the line. You're at the end of 4 lines. You're at the end of more than that. But the idea is to loosen it up so that you can travel as appropriate around the Enneagram. And one thing to do in training or thinking about it is to take a single line, take 3 and 6. My tendency is to want to just go ahead and finish it. What does 6 offer me? Well, caution, legitimate caution. Many examples to be had as 3 flies, as 3 closes too quick. So all the lines, including the wings, need to be not balanced, but open and easily accessible. You follow? Yes, okay.
I think you said that Naranjo said to go around the circle, or was that Echazo? That
It was Echazo. Echazo says that every day we go around the whole Enneagram. Sometimes it happens very quickly, sometimes very slowly, but we touch all the bases unless there's a problem. It's one of the main pathways. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Renat.
Alistair has his hand up. Go ahead, Alistair.
Thanks. I have a somewhat unrelated question. So since January, I've been trying to discover the origins of the Enneagram, and I've always thought it's got Greek origins. And you see some narratives of Naranjo and Echazo saying it sort of came from like the Kabbalah or something like that in Jewish mysticism, like you mentioned earlier. So you're the first person I've come across who's kind of deep into Greek stuff, if I can call it that. And my question is, why is it called the Enneagram then? Why does it have this Greek term? Not an English term or something that comes from Jewish or Hebrew language. Is there any reason why it's got this sort of, unorthodox, name? Because if you use it in corporate, people say, ooh, this woohoo stuff, what's this thing you're trying to sell to me as a coach? So I'm really curious if you've got any ideas as to why it kept this Greek name.
I certainly know the reaction that corporate has to the name Enneagram. I used to go through many iterations to try to soften it, 9 points, whatever, things like that. I think it was, the Enneagram is part of a series of 12. The whole Enneagram is part of a series of 12 that Pythagoras worked with. He also had, say, the triangle, which is called the triangle even in the ancient books, so in the modern ancient books. I think partly the Greek caught on because Pythagoras is pretty old and established, and so Enneagram became part of that series and then separated out. Who's to say? Everyone likes using Greek names, and there's a Hebrew name that could be probably harder for people to say. So there's no real answer. It's just that Greek was the word in the world when things started to take. And also, Ichazo's teachers used Greek. And so that may be part of why the Enneagram is the way it is. And I believe even Gurdjieff used the Greek, but I'm not sure. But that's possible too. So it's just a question of the right place at the right time, I would say. That's all I would know.
Okay, thanks. That gives me
Sure.
some ideas. And Troy is one of my favorite movies. I watch it once every year, rewatch it once every year. So now I'm going to watch it in a different light or through a different lens. Thanks.
What is the movie?
Troy.
Oh, Troy, sure.
Yeah. With Brad Pitt.
Yes, a different way of looking.
Thanks, Alistair. Are there
Thanks,
any other
Alistair.
any
Anyone
other
else?
questions? What's in the chat? All right. Well, we're just about at time. So if there aren't any other questions, last chance for any other questions or comments. Anna, you seem to know a lot about this particular subject. Going to tell us a little, share a little bit about your experience.
Sure. I don't know that much about it. I just was a literature major, and so I read the Odyssey in college, and I really want to go back now and read it again through this lens. I mean, I'm going to read it aloud to my son. So thank you, Michael, for sharing that really touching story about how that was how you came to the Odyssey yourself. I really appreciated that.
How old were you when your dad read that to you, Michael?
8, like 8, 9. I still had a fit on the chair. And so that's what I'm thinking. He read from a big blue-green book. I remember it was a gigantic book. And I so loved that edition. And recently I was in Berkeley and found the book in the bookstore. And the thing that surprised me was, oh, it's not that big. It's a little bigger than a regular book. It's relatively normal size. Yeah, so my dad, I really encourage people when we have more time, or when you're working with children especially, to imagine the places, to imagine themselves in the places, and so that they can co-create the experience. The other thing is that I didn't have any time for is how each type appears in the modern world. Do you recognize the Cyclops? And it's a street tough, or it's some kind of bully. And then there are many comparisons to be made between the modern version. I say in the book, yes, all these are myths and all of that. I believe that, but they're all true as well. And they all walk by you on the street every day. And so it's a good way of thinking about it, a way of getting into the types if you want to do that. But to participate rather than just watch.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Any last questions or comments from anybody?
Can I just make a comment, Renata?
Thanks, Teresa.
Hello, Michael. That was fascinating. I could listen to you for hours. Each year I go to Florence and help facilitate with B Chestnut to her the Dante Enneagram. And I was really moved by your description of Hades, because when we spend a few days in hell in Dante, Dante's going around and he's meeting all these characters and they're all on their own. And you said that they're full of regrets. The warriors were full of regrets. Well, the characters that Dante meet are also full of blame.
Oh,
it's
interesting.
somebody else's fault. They're still full of denial and lies. Like there's a couple there who are in hell for adultery. Can't remember their names now. And they're like, we were only reading a book together. You know? And Dante actually starts feeling really sorry for them. He gets pulled into the story, you know, and it's like, no, move on. So, you know, the only difference between the people in purgatory and the people in hell is the people in purgatory they've committed the same sins, but they're not full of regret. They're saying, I did it and I'm ready to purge it. I'm ready to do the work. And the people in hell have done the same sin, but they're still, no, I didn't. Or it was his fault. So it's the actual life was, it's, you know, and I think that's very moving how you said that when you meet people who are just full of regret, full of story, you know, hell of their own making in, you know, here. And then the difference between those who are doing the work, as we say, and it is work, but they're moving. It's a very interesting point. And the ones in purgatory are always in groups. They always purge together in groups and they sing. So they might have a big stone on their back, or they might have their eyes sewn up like the envious, but they're singing and focusing their mind on the Psalms and scripture, whereas the ones in hell are on their own in their story, waiting to retell their story and their grievances to anyone who walks by. So yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Teresa.
There is a difference between Dante and the Odyssey in that Dante's prime sources were the Aeneid by Virgil, that Rome had prohibited any use of the Odyssey because it's basically a story of finding freedom, of liberation as an individual. And they rewrote it, and in the Aeneid, Ulysses is portrayed as a buffoon, as an immoral person to be avoided. And Dante, but it uses these same themes, but in a way to control people, because Rome liked control. And Dante's writings were subsequently reported to be the basis of fascism in Italy, of creating a state. So to me, I see the Odyssey as a declaration of independence of all humanity, how to live our best life. But there are others who try to adapt this and take us down roads of control. And I think control happens in many different ways, from states, from other people, from organizations. And I think finding freedom is what we all look for when we get up on a Saturday or, at this point sharing, is to find a better way, a better life. And that's what I love about the ending of the Odyssey, because the last chapter, Ulysses is helping mentor other people to show them a better way. And it says, it was the happiest time of his life. He's traveled everywhere. He's done everything. He's the most famous, but it is in helping others that we find fulfillment.
Beautiful. Thanks, Bob. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Michael, what a gift you are to us today. The gratitude's pouring in the chat. Can't thank you enough. That was absolutely delightful and enriching and wonderful, and just love your humor and your storytelling ability. That was a real joy. Thank you. What a wonderful 2 hours to spend on a Saturday afternoon. Well, that's what it is for us in South Africa. So thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everybody.
We'll be,
It's my pleasure too.
we'll be sending out a copy of the recording to our greater community. So I know many people were sad that they would be missing the live session. We've got school holidays and things in South Africa. So a lot of people looking forward to watching the recording, which will be posted on YouTube for all to see. So very, very grateful, and thank you to all of you for joining us and learning together in a group, as Teresa said. Yeah, always better together. So thanks all, and Michael, bless you, and thank you so much. And yeah,
It was beautiful. It was a beautiful way to spend the afternoon.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Teresa.
Thank you. And if you've got any Enneagram sessions or work coming up, Michael, you can let me know and we'll tag that into the email when we send out the recording. So
Terrific.
thanks all for being here, and last applause for Michael, and we'll be on our way. Thank you.